They called it the wedding of the season. Lady Genevieve Stirling was 3 hours away from saving her family from ruin. But at 9:00 a.m., a single letter destroyed everything. Her fiancé, the golden-haired Viscount, didn't just leave her. He humiliated her. She stood at the altar, a bride without a groom, facing a future of poverty and disgrace. The church went silent. Her life was over, until a shadow detached itself from the back of the cathedral. The Duke of Rosedale, a man with a heart of ice and a reputation to match, stepped forward. He didn't offer pity. He offered a ring. This is the true story of the scandal that shook Victorian London. London, May 1894. The air in the Stirling townhouse smelled of lavender water and panic. Lady Genevieve Stirling, known to her few close friends as Evie, sat before her vanity. She was 21 years old, possessing a beauty that was often described as serene doe-brown eyes and mahogany hair that was currently being pinned into an intricate chignon by her maid, Sarah. But today the serenity was fractured. Her hands resting on the cold marble of the table were trembling so violently that her engagement ring, a modest sapphire, clicked rhythmically against the stone. The door to her chambers flew open. It wasn't her mother, the Countess, who entered with the soft weeping expected of a wedding morning. It was her father, the Earl of Hemsley. His face was the colour of old parchment. "Leave us!" the Earl barked at the maid. Sarah curtsied, dropping a hairpin, and fled. Evie stood up her corset, suddenly feeling tight enough to snap her ribs. "Papa, what is it? Has something happened to the carriage?" The Earl didn't speak. He simply held out a piece of paper. It wasn't proper stationery. It was a sheet of club paper, stamped with the crest of White's Gentlemen's Club. The handwriting was jagged, likely written under the influence of brandy or haste. Evie took it. The ink was barely dry. "Lord Hemsley, I find I cannot do it. The accounts you showed me yesterday regarding your estate's true value were illuminating. I am a man of ambition, not charity. While your daughter is pleasant, she comes with a dowry of debt. I will not be at St. George's this morning. I suggest you tell the guests she has taken ill. It will save us all the embarrassment. Viscount Frederick Pembroke." The silence in the room was heavier than the velvet drapes blocking out the morning sun. "He knows," Evie whispered, her voice sounding strange to her own ears. "He knows we are penniless. He knows I wagered the last of the liquid assets on the shipping venture that failed last Tuesday." Her father admitted, his voice hollow. He sank into the delicate chair intended for visitors. "I thought the marriage settlements would be signed before he looked into the ledger. I thought Pembroke was too in love to check." "Love?" Evie laughed, a brittle, terrifying sound. "Frederick loves mirrors, Papa. He loved how I looked on his arm. He does not love bankruptcy." Evie looked at her reflection. She was fully dressed in Alençon lace, a dress that cost more than the current contents of their bank account. If this wedding did not happen, the creditors waiting in the wings would descend by noon. The house, the furniture, her mother's jewelry, it would all be seized. They would be destitute, not just poor, but social pariahs. "I will go downstairs and tell the staff," the Earl said, putting his face in his hands. "We will say you have cholera, typhoid, anything." "No." The Earl looked up. "Genevieve." Evie turned from the mirror. Her face was pale, but her eyes were dry. A cold resolve, forged in the fires of absolute desperation, settled over her. "If we cancel, the rumors start immediately. They will say he left me. They will dig. They will find the debts. We will be ruined by supper." She smoothed the lace of her skirt. "We go to the church." "He won't be there, Evie. You will be standing at the altar alone. He might be bluffing. She lied, though she knew Frederick was too selfish to bluff. Or perhaps I can shame him into appearing. If I am there standing in the light of God and society, will he truly dare to leave me waiting? He cares for his reputation above all else. It was a gamble of insanity, but Evie knew the truth. She was already dead, socially. She might as well attend her own funeral in a wedding dress. St. George's, Hanover Square, was a cavern of whispering silk and restless feathers. 500 of London's elite had gathered. The air was thick with the scent of hothouse lilies and expensive perfume. Evie walked down the aisle on her father's arm. She focused entirely on the stained glass window at the far end, refusing to look at the pews. She could feel the eyes on her, calculating, assessing. Is she thinner? Is that lace real? Why does the Earl look like he's walking to the gallows? As they neared the altar, the organ music swelled a triumphant herald, but the space to the right of the vicar was empty. The music faltered, then stopped. The silence that followed was instant and violent. It rushed into the vacuum louder than any scream. Evie stopped. She stood 10 feet from the altar steps. Her father's arm was shaking so hard it vibrated her entire frame. "Where is he?" A voice hissed from the front pew. It was Frederick's mother, a woman who looked like a hawk, dressed in purple satin. Evie didn't move. She stared at the empty space. He didn't come. He truly didn't come. The murmurs began, a low wave of noise rising from the back of the church. "Jilted. Left her. Look at her face." Then the heavy oak doors at the back of the church creaked open. Every head turned, necks craning. Evie felt a surge of nausea. Frederick, had he come? It was not Frederick. A footman in the Pembroke livery walked hesitantly down the centre aisle. The sound of his boots on the stone floor was agonizingly slow. He carried a silver salver, and upon it a single white envelope. He stopped before Evie and her father. He bowed low, unable to meet her eyes. "For you, my lady," the footman whispered. Evie didn't take it. She couldn't feel her fingers. Her father snatched the envelope and tore it open. He read it, and a sob ripped from his throat, a pathetic sound that echoed in the vaulted ceiling. "He is not coming," the Earl announced, his voice cracking. He looked at the congregation, his eyes wide and unseeing. "Viscount Pembroke sends his regrets." Chaos. It wasn't a polite rumble anymore. It was an uproar. People stood up. Lady Pembroke fainted, or pretended to. The shame washed over Evie like boiling water. She stood frozen, a statue of lace and misery. This was it. The end of her life. She would be the woman who was left at the altar. No one would marry her now. The debts would consume them. She would end up a governess, or worse, begging on the streets of Cheapside. She turned to her father to beg him to take her away to hide her, but he was slumped against the pew, defeated. Pathetic. The voice cut through the din. It was deep baritone and laced with a terrifying authority. The noise in the church died down, not out of respect, but out of fear. From the shadows of the side nave near the pillars where the uninvited or latecomers stood, a man emerged. He was tall, looming over 6 feet, dressed in mourning black despite the occasion. His hair was dark as pitch, and a scar ran faintly through his left eyebrow, giving him a perpetually cynical expression. Silas Hawthorne, the Duke of Rosedale. A collective gasp went through the room. Rosedale was not a man of society. He was a recluse, a man rumoured to have made his fortune in the brutal diamond mines of South Africa, a man who had supposedly killed a rival in a duel in Paris 3 years ago. He was immensely wealthy, incredibly powerful, and utterly terrifying. He walked toward the altar. His stride was predatory. He didn't look at the congregation. He looked only at Evie. He stopped in front of her, ignoring her trembling father. His eyes were a startling, icy grey. "The Viscount," Silas said, his voice, carrying to the back of the church without effort, "is a fool and a coward." Evie looked up at him, her breath hitching. "Your Grace." Silas looked her up and down. It wasn't a look of lust. It was the look of a man appraising a diamond for flaws. "You require a husband, Lady Genevieve. You require protection. And your father requires liquidity." Evie's cheeks burned. He knew. Everyone would know soon. Silas turned to the vicar who was trembling, holding his prayer book. "Open the book, Vicar," Silas commanded. "Your Grace," the vicar squeaked. I do not understand." Silas turned back to Evie. He extended a gloved hand. It was large, steady, and demanding. "I am not a man who likes to see good assets go to waste," Silas said low enough that only she could hear. "I need a wife to stop my aunt from pestering me. You need a fortune to save your father. I am offering you a trade, Genevieve. Not a romance. A trade." He raised his voice again. "I will take the Viscount's place. Marry me, and you leave this church a duchess untouchable by the tongues of these vipers." Evie stared at his hand. It was insanity. He was a stranger, a man with a dark reputation. But looking past him, she saw the sneering faces of the friends who would destroy her tomorrow. She saw her father's ruin. She looked into the cold grey eyes of the Wolf of Rosedale. Slowly, Lady Genevieve Sterling reached out and placed her hand in his. "I accept," she whispered. The ceremony was a blur of surrealism. The vicar, terrified of offending a duke who owned half the county, performed the rites with stumbling haste. The license was hurriedly amended, a legal grey area that Silas swept aside with a glare, and a heavy purse of coins dropped onto the vestry table. Evie felt like she was floating above her own body. She repeated the words to have and to hold, for richer, for poorer mechanically. "With this ring I thee wed." Silas didn't have a wedding ring. He pulled a heavy signet ring from his pinky finger. It was gold warm from his skin and embossed with the hawthorn crest, a rampant wolf. It was far too big for her finger. He slid it onto her thumb, the only digit where it would stay. "I pronounce you man and wife." There was no kiss. Silas merely nodded to her, a sharp jerk of his chin. "Come, we are leaving." He didn't offer her his arm immediately. He turned to the congregation. The silence was absolute. Silas swept his gaze over the 500 guests. "Lady Genevieve is now the Duchess of Rosedale," he announced. "Anyone who speaks a word of disrespect regarding the events of this morning will answer to me, and I assure you, I am not as forgiving as the Viscount." He offered his arm then. Evie took it. It felt like holding on to a granite pillar. They walked back up the aisle. This time no one whispered. The guests bowed and curtsied as they passed, terrified and awed. They had come to watch a social execution. Instead, they had witnessed a coronation. Outside, the carriage intended for Frederick was waiting. Silas ignored it. He signalled to a sleek black carriage with 4 black horses that had just pulled up his own. He helped her in his grip, firm but impersonal. As the door clicked shut, cutting off the noise of the confused crowd, and the sobbing of her mother who had finally run out of the church, the reality crashed down on Evie. She was alone, in a small enclosed space, with a man she didn't know. A man she had just married. The carriage lurched forward. Evie pressed herself into the velvet corner, clutching her bouquet of wilting roses, until the thorns dug into her gloves. Silas didn't look at her. He removed his top hat and placed it on the seat opposite, then ran a hand through his dark hair. He looked tired. "Why?" Evie asked. Her voice shook. "Why did you do it?" Silas looked out the window at the passing streets of London. "Do not mistake my actions for chivalry, madam. I despise chivalry." "Then what you said, it was a trade." "It is." He turned those grey eyes on her. Up close, she saw flecks of green in them, and lines of harsh experience around his mouth. "Frederick Pembroke owes me £50,000. He thought he could outmaneuver me in business. By humiliating you, he thought he was free to marry the American heiress Miss Gold next month. He needs her money to pay me." Evie gasped. He is marrying someone else. He intends to. But by marrying you, I have just acquired your father's debts, have I not?" "Yes," she whispered in shame. "And by extension, I now own the mortgages on the Sterling estates, which Pembroke was trying to buy through a proxy to expand his hunting grounds." Silas smiled, but it was a cold, wolfish thing. "I didn't just save you, Duchess. I blocked his move. I took the one thing he thought he had discarded, and I made her more powerful than he will ever be. Pembroke hates nothing more than losing a prize." Evie felt a chill settle in her bones. She wasn't a wife. She wasn't even a woman to him. She was a chess piece, a weapon to be used against a rival. "So," Evie said, trying to summon the dignity of a duchess, "I am a tool for your revenge." "You are my wife," Silas corrected. "You will have my name, my protection, and access to my fortune. Your father's debts are cleared as of this moment. You will never want for a dress or a meal again." He leaned forward, bracing his elbows on his knees, invading her space. "But do not expect love, Genevieve. I buried my heart a long time ago. You play the part of the Duchess of Rosedale, you run my household, and you produce an heir. That is the bargain. Can you accept that?" Evie looked at the heavy gold ring on her thumb. It weighed her down, anchoring her to this dark, dangerous man. She thought of Frederick's betrayal. She thought of the whispers she had escaped. She looked up, meeting his gaze without flinching. "I keep my bargains, Your Grace. I will be the best Duchess London has ever seen, but do not expect me to warm your bed out of gratitude." Silas stared at her for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, he chuckled. It was a dry, rusty sound. "Good," he said, leaning back. "I prefer a fighter. It will make the coming war with Pembroke much more entertaining." The carriage turned the corner, heading away from the life she knew and toward the imposing stone facade of Rosedale House. The wedding was over. The war had just begun. Rosedale House sat in the heart of Mayfair, like a brooding granite beast. It was double the size of Evie's childhood home, with a facade soot-stained by the London fog and windows that looked like blackened eyes. It had not known a mistress in 20 years since Silas's mother died, and it showed in the oppressive stillness of the air. When the carriage stopped, the front doors opened instantly. A phalanx of liveried staff stood waiting in the cavernous black-and-white marble hall. Silas helped Evie down. His touch was brief, clinical. As they ascended the stone steps, he spoke without looking at her. "Mrs. Croft is the housekeeper. Gable is the butler. They run the house, efficiently. You will find them amenable to any changes you wish to make, provided those changes do not interfere with my work hours or the quiet I require in the East Wing." They entered the hall. The staff bowed in terrified unison. Silas didn't even acknowledge them. He stalked toward the grand staircase, expecting Evie to keep up. The house smelled of beeswax, old leather, and a faint metallic scent that reminded Evie of blood on coins. It was cold, a pervasive chill that seeped through the silk of her wedding dress. He led her past the main chambers to the second floor, stopping before a set of imposing double doors made of dark mahogany. "These are the ducal chambers," Silas said. He opened one door, revealing a sitting room decorated in heavy emerald velvet and dark wood. "This will be your private domain. Your bedroom and dressing room are through there." He pointed to an adjoining door. Evie stepped inside. It was luxurious, far grander than anything she had ever known, but it felt like a high-class hotel room devoid of personality. "And your rooms, Your Grace?" she asked, turning to face him. He pointed to a door on the opposite wall of the sitting room. "Through there. We share this connecting parlour. A convenience for appearances, should we have house guests who expect a happily married couple." "I see. And are we to lock our respective doors at night?" she asked, her voice steady, testing the boundaries of their agreement. Silas looked at her, his eyes unreadable. "I do not force myself on women, Genevieve, especially not one I purchased to annoy a rival. Your bed is your own, unless, of course, you decide you wish to fulfill the heir portion of our contract sooner rather than later." Evie blushed furiously. "I think we have had enough excitement for one day." "Agreed?" He pulled a gold pocket watch from his waistcoat. "Dinner is at 8. Do not be late. I despise tardiness." He turned and left through his own bedroom door, the click of the latch sounding final. Evie stood alone in the center of the vast, unfamiliar room, still wearing the wedding dress intended for another man bearing the heavy signet ring of a stranger. She walked to the window and looked out at the walled garden below. It was overgrown, untended, full of thorny bushes and shadowed corners. It looked exactly like the man she had just married. The first week at Rosedale House passed in a strange, silent rhythm. Evie saw her husband exactly twice a day, once at breakfast, where he read the Times and drank black coffee, and once at dinner, which was usually a silent affair, interrupted only by the clinking of silver against fine china. He spent his days in his study in the East Wing, a room she was tacitly forbidden to enter. Messengers came and went at all hours, men with hard faces and foreign accents, carrying leather satchels. Silas was building an empire, though, of what sort Evie couldn't discern. She meanwhile threw herself into running the house. It was her job, the only way she could pay back the debt she felt weighing on her soul. She ordered the heavy drapes cleaned, letting light into the dusty salons. She ordered fresh flowers for the hallway, fighting the smell of old metal with the scent of lilies. The staff seemed relieved to have direction, though they still flinched whenever the Duke's heavy footsteps echoed in the hall. It was on a Tuesday of the second week that the silence was broken. Evie was in the morning room reviewing menus with Mrs. Croft when Gable entered carrying a silver tray. On it lay a single cream-colored envelope embossed with gold. Gable presented it to Evie with a nervous tremor in his hand. "It arrived just now, Your Grace, by special messenger." Evie took it. The seal was the crest of the Duke and Duchess of Richmond. It was an invitation to their annual summer ball, the premier event of the season, the event where everyone who was anyone would be present, including Viscount Frederick Pembroke. Evie felt sick. She hadn't left the house since the wedding. She wasn't ready to face the whispers, the pitying glances, the triumphant sneer of the man who had abandoned her. The door opened, and Silas walked in. He didn't apologize for interrupting. He looked at the envelope in her hand, then at her pale face. "Richmond's ball," he stated, not asking. "Yes, we are attending." Evie stood up, scattering menu cards. "What Silas know, we cannot. It has only been 2 weeks. They will staring. They will be laughing." Silas walked over to her, his sheer size dwarfing the room. He took the invitation from her fingers and tossed it onto the table. "Let them stare," he said, his voice dropping to that dangerous baritone. "You are the Duchess of Rosedale now. You do not hide. If you hide, Pembroke wins. He will think you are broken." "Are you broken, Genevieve?" The challenge hung in the air. Evie straightened her spine. She thought of her father, who was slowly recovering his dignity now that the debts were paid. She thought of Frederick's cruel note. "No," she said fiercely. "I am not broken." A flicker of something that looked almost like approval crossed Silas's scarred face. "Good. Then we go. And we do not just attend, Genevieve. We conquer." He turned to Mrs. Croft, who was trying to blend into the wallpaper. "Have the carriage brought around in an hour. The Duchess and I are going to the bank." "The bank, Your Grace?" Evie asked. "You cannot wear pearls to Richmond's ball," Silas said, glancing disdainfully at the modest necklace she wore. "You need armor. The Hawthorne diamonds have been in a vault for 20 years. It is time they saw the light." The Richmond ballroom was a sea of pastel silks and glittering candlelight, humming with the noise of 400 aristocrats pretending to like each other. The air was warm and perfumed, the orchestra playing a lively waltz. At 10 o'clock, precisely, the major domo banged his staff at the top of the grand marble staircase. His Grace the Duke of Rosedale, and Her Grace the Duchess of Rosedale. The music didn't stop, but the conversation did. It died, instantly replaced by a collective intake of breath that hissed through the cavernous room. Every head turned upward. Silas stood at the top of the stairs, a towering figure in severe black evening, where his face a mask of boredom. But all eyes were on Evie. She wore a gown of deep sapphire blue silk that matched the sapphire engagement ring Frederick had given her a deliberate, mocking choice. But where that ring had been modest, the jewelry she wore now was obscene in its extravagance. Around her neck was the Hawthorne necklace, a cascade of diamonds so large and brilliant they seemed to trap the candlelight, ending in a pendant the size of a robin's egg. Matching diamonds dripped from her ears and wrist. On her thumb, the heavy gold signet ring was gone, replaced by a diamond solitaire that could have purchased a small country. She was not merely rich, she was dripping in aggressive, terrifying wealth. Evie placed her hand on Silas's arm. He felt like iron beneath the fine wool of his coat. "Chin up," he murmured, low enough only for her to hear. "They are sheep. Do not let them see you flinch." They descended the stairs. It felt like walking into an arena of lions. The crowd parted before them, a red sea of gossip-mongers. Curtsies were deeper than usual. Bows were lower. Fear, Evie realized, was a powerful motivator for respect. Silas led her straight through the center of the room. He didn't stop to chat. He nodded curtly to a few powerful men, bankers, politicians, and ignored the society matrons completely. They were near the champagne fountain when the confrontation they had all been waiting for materialized. Viscount Frederick Pembroke emerged from the crowd. He looked golden and handsome as always, but there was a nervous sweat on his upper lip. On his arm was Miss Cecilia Gold, the American heiress, a pretty girl with anxious eyes who looked far too young for the shark she was attached to. The circle around them widened. The orchestra seemed to fade into the background. Frederick bowed, but it was shallow. "Your Grace." "Rosedale." He nodded to Silas, then turned his gaze to Evie. His eyes widened slightly as he took in the diamonds, a flash of avarice replacing his usual charm. "Genevieve," Frederick said, his tone dripping with faux concern. "I must say, I am surprised to see you out so soon. After everything. I hope you have recovered from your ordeal." It was a masterstroke of nastiness, implying she was a victim, pitiable and frail. Evie felt her throat tighten. Before she could speak, Silas stepped slightly in front of her. He didn't raise his voice, but the temperature around them seemed to drop 10 degrees. "The Duchess." Silas said, stressing her title, has nothing to recover from Pembroke, save perhaps the close proximity to a man who values a ledger over his honour. Frederick flushed angrily. Careful, Rosedale. I acted prudently. A man must protect his assets. Assets? Silas repeated dryly. He glanced down at Miss Gold, who looked terrified. Is that what you call them, I suppose? When one's own fortune is built on sand, one must constantly hunt for fresh cement. It was a direct hit. Everyone knew Frederick needed Miss Gold's money to stay afloat, especially now that Silas held his debts. Frederick's charming mask slipped. He glared at Evie. You seem to have landed on your feet, my dear, though one wonders what price you paid for such baubles. He gestured vaguely at her diamonds. Silas moved so fast Evie didn't see it happen. One moment he was standing beside her, the next he was inches from Frederick's face. Frederick flinched backward, nearly knocking over Miss Gold. The price, Silas said, his voice a lethal whisper that carried further than a shout, was finding a man who knows the value of a rare diamond when he sees one, rather than a fool who throws it away because he cannot afford the setting. Silas stepped back, straightening his cuffs. He offered his arm to Evie. Come, my dear. The air in this corner of the room has suddenly become quite stale. I believe they are playing a waltz. He led her onto the dance floor, leaving Frederick humiliated and fuming in their wake. Silas pulled her into his arms for the waltz. His hold was firm, authoritative. They moved together flawlessly, a dark whirlwind among the pastel dancers. For the first time, Evie felt the sheer, raw power of the man she had married. He had obliterated Frederick without raising a fist. You did well, Silas murmured, looking over her head at the staring crowd. You did all the talking. Evie breathed, still adrenaline shaky. He looked down at her, then his grey eyes intense. You stood there wearing my name, and my diamonds, looking at him like he was dirt beneath your shoe. That spoke louder than words, Genevieve. For a fleeting moment, as they spun under the chandeliers, Evie felt something other than fear or gratitude toward her husband. It felt dangerously like admiration. The carriage ride home was quiet, but the tension had changed. It wasn't the icy silence of before. It was a charged, humming silence. They had fought a battle together, and won. When they reached Rosedale House, it was past 2:00 a.m. Gable was waiting to take Silas's coat. Evie felt exhausted, the weight of the diamonds suddenly heavy on her skin. I will bid you good night, your grace, she said in the hall. Good night, Genevieve. He watched her ascend the stairs, his expression brooding. Evie went to her room. Her maid was waiting to help her out of the sapphire gown and lock the priceless jewels in the safe hidden in her dressing-room wall. Once alone, Evie couldn't sleep. The adrenaline was still coursing through her veins. She put on a silk dressing gown and wandered into the connecting parlour. It was empty, lit only by the dying embers of the fireplace. She looked at Silas's door. It was closed. She needed to walk off the energy. She quietly exited the parlour into the main second-floor hallway. The house was filled with shadows. She walked past the guest rooms, past the library, her slippered feet silent on the Persian runners. She found herself at the end of the corridor, where a heavy oak door marked the entrance to the north wing. She had never been down here. Mrs. Croft had vaguely mentioned it was used for storage. Curiosity fueled by the strange energy of the night got the better of her. She tried the handle. Surprisingly, it wasn't locked. The door creaked open. The corridor beyond was much colder than the rest of the house, smelling of damp and disuse. There were no gas lamps lit here, only moonlight filtering through tall, unwashed windows. Furniture was draped in white dust sheets, looking like ghosts in the gloom. Evie walked slowly down the hall. Why was this part of the house abandoned? At the very end of the hall was another door. Unlike the others, this one was new. The wood unvarnished and fitted with a heavy modern brass lock. Evie reached out to touch the cold brass. What was Silas hiding behind here? "What are you doing?" The voice roared out of the darkness behind her. Evie shrieked and spun around. Silas stood at the end of the hallway holding a candelabra. The flickering light cast deep shadows on his face, making his scar look grotesque, and his eyes burn with a terrifying fury. He was still in his evening shirt and trousers, having discarded his coat and tie. He strode toward her, the candlelight vibrating with his rage. He grabbed her wrist, his grip hard enough to bruise. "I asked you a question," he snarled, pulling her away from the locked door. "What are you doing in this wing?" I was just exploring," Evie stammered, terrified by this sudden shift from the controlled man at the ball to this enraged beast. "I couldn't sleep. The door was open." "This wing is forbidden," Silas hissed, pushing her back toward the main house. "Do you understand me, Genevieve? You are never to come here. Never." "Why?" she cried, trying to wrench her wrist free. "What is behind that door, Silas? Is it something illegal? Is it—" He stopped abruptly, yanking her close so their faces were inches apart. The scent of brandy was on his breath. "It is none of your concern," he said, his voice dropping to a deadly quiet that was far scarier than his shouting. "You wanted to know the terms of our bargain. Here is a new one. You run my house. You wear my diamonds. You humiliate my enemies. But you do not dig into my past. If I ever catch you near this door again, Genevieve, I will send you back to your father. Penniless scandal, be damned." He released her wrist with a shove. "Now go to bed." Evie fled. She ran back down the cold corridor past the ghostly furniture, back to the safety of her luxurious cage. She slammed the door to her bedroom and leaned against it, heart pounding. Just hours ago, he had been her protector, her champion. Now he was her jailer. The Duke of Rosedale had secrets dark enough to make him threaten the only person currently on his side. And Evie knew with chilling certainty that she wouldn't be able to stop herself from finding out what they were. The following week at Rosedale House was not lived. It was endured. The silence between Evie and Silas was no longer the awkward quiet of strangers. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a truce that was about to break. Silas spent more time away leaving before dawn and returning long after Evie had retired to her lonely bed. When they did cross paths, his gaze was guarded, his jaw set hard. He looked at her, not with anger, but with a weary distrust that hurt more than his shouting. Evie, however, was not a woman who could sit in a gilded cage and wait for the roof to collapse. The mystery of the north wing gnawed at her. She respected his warning. She did not go back to the corridor, but she began to hunt for answers elsewhere. She started with the library. It was a massive 2-story room filled with books that hadn't been opened in decades. She wasn't looking for literature. She was looking for history. She spent hours scouring old society gazettes and newspapers from 10 years prior, searching for the name Hawthorne. She found nothing about a wife. She found only brief mentions of Silas's departure for South Africa 7 years ago, a younger son seeking fortune. There was no scandal in print. Whatever had happened, Silas had buried it deep. On Thursday, the isolation became unbearable. Evie ordered the carriage. She needed air. She told Gable she was going to Bond Street to purchase stationery. London was grey and drizzling, the cobblestones slick with rain. Evie finished her shopping quickly and decided to walk in Hyde Park, her footman trailing a respectful distance behind with an umbrella. The park was mostly empty, save for a few nannies and determined walkers. Evie walked near the Serpentine, watching the grey water ripple. "Duchess," The voice came from behind a cluster of elms. Evie stiffened. She knew that voice. It was smoother than silk and sharper than a razor. She turned to face Viscount Frederick Pembroke. He looked worse than he had at the ball. His eyes were bloodshot, and his cravat was tied with less than his usual precision. The rumour mill said Silas's financial pressure was working. Frederick was hemorrhaging money. "Viscount," Evie said coldly, "you should not address me without my husband present." Frederick laughed a bitter sound. He stepped out from under the trees, ignoring the rain dampening his coat. "Your husband, the Wolf of Rosedale. Tell me, Genevieve, has he shown you his teeth yet? Has he locked you in the tower?" "I am quite happy, thank you," she lied, lifting her chin. "If you will excuse me." She turned to leave, but Frederick moved to block her path. He didn't touch her. He knew the footman was watching, but he leaned in close. "Did you ask him about the north wing?" Frederick whispered. Evie froze. The rain drummed against her umbrella. "I do not know what you mean." "Do not play the fool. It does not suit you," Frederick sneered. "The servants talk. Everyone knows the east wing is his office, and the north wing is his shrine. But do you know who it is for?" Evie stared at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Leave me alone, Frederick." "It is for Isabella," Frederick said, savouring the name. "Isabella Vance, the woman he killed." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "You are lying." "Am I ask him? Ask him about the duel in Paris. Ask him why Isabella died in a convent in France while he was busy digging for diamonds in the mud." Frederick's eyes gleamed with malice. "He didn't just lose her, Genevieve. He destroyed her. And now he has bought you to replace her. Have you looked in a mirror lately? You have her eyes. You have her hair. You aren't his wife. You are his ghost." Evie felt bile rise in her throat. She stepped back, her hand trembling. "My footman is approaching Lord Pembroke. If you do not leave, I will have you removed." Frederick tipped his hat a mocking gesture. "Ask him, Evie. Ask him before you end up like her." He turned and walked away into the mist, leaving Evie standing by the grey water, the cold seeping into her very bones. Evie returned to Rosedale House in a daze. The grand foyer felt like a mausoleum. You aren't his wife. You are his ghost. Was that it? Was that why he had chosen her? Not for revenge against Frederick, but because she looked like a dead woman? The thought made her feel sick, used in a way that was far worse than the political marriage she had agreed to. She went to her room and paced. She couldn't wait anymore. She couldn't live in this house, sharing a wall with a man who might be a monster without knowing the truth. She waited until midnight. She heard Silas come in. She heard the heavy tread of his boots in the hallway, then the closing of his bedroom door. She waited another hour until the house was settled into a deep, groaning silence. Evie took a brass letter opener from her desk, a flimsy weapon, but better than nothing. She didn't go to the north wing. She went to the one place she knew the truth would be kept, his study in the east wing. The door was locked, of course, but Evie had learned a trick or two from her mischievous younger brother before he was sent to boarding school. She used a hairpin, wiggling it in the old mechanism. It took 5 agonizing minutes, but eventually the lock clicked. She slipped inside. The study was cold, smelling of tobacco and ink. Moonlight streamed in through the tall windows. She went to the massive oak desk. It was covered in papers, railway shares, mining deeds, bank ledgers. She ignored them. She began opening drawers. The top drawers held stationery and wax. The bottom drawer was locked. She tugged on it. Locked tight. She looked around the desk. Under the blotter, no inside. A vase, no. Then she saw it. a small wooden box sitting on the mantelpiece, seemingly decorative. She opened it. Inside was a small key. She took it and opened the bottom drawer. There were no business papers inside. There was only a stack of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon and a small oval portrait in a silver frame. Evie picked up the portrait. She angled it toward the moonlight. The woman in the painting was beautiful. She had dark mahogany hair piled high. She had large, dough-brown eyes. She was smiling a soft, gentle smile. It was like looking in a mirror. Evie gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Frederick was right. She looked exactly like Isabella. She reached for the letters. Her hands shook as she untied the ribbon. She pulled out the top one. It was dated 5 years ago. My dearest Silas, the cough is worse today. The doctors here are kind, but they cost so much. I know you are working hard in the mines. Do not worry about me. I dream of the day you return. The door to the study slammed open. Evie jumped, dropping the letter. Silas stood in the doorway. He was wearing a dressing gown, his chest heaving, his face a mask of absolute fury. I told you, he roared, striding across the room, to never pry into my life. He snatched the letter from the floor and the portrait from her hand. He looked at them, and for a second, the rage in his eyes fractured into agony. Then the rage returned hotter than before. You have no right, he shouted. You have no right to touch her. Who is she? Evie screamed back, fear giving way to a desperate need for truth. Is she why you married me, because I look like her? Am I just a replacement for the woman you killed? Silas froze. The color drained from his face, leaving the scar standing out in stark white relief. What did you say? Frederick told me. Evie cried, tears streaming down her face. He told me about Isabella. He told me you let her die in France while you were chasing diamonds. He told me you're a murderer. Silas went very still. The violence seemed to evaporate, leaving behind a cold, terrifying void. He placed the portrait gently back on the desk. Frederick told you that? Silas asked, his voice barely a whisper. Yes. Silas looked at her. And you believed him? I found the portrait, Silas. I look just like her. What am I supposed to think? Silas let out a laugh, but it was a broken, jagged sound. He walked to the window and looked out at the dark grounds. You do look like her, he admitted quietly. That is why I noticed you in the church. But that is not why I married you. He turned back to face her. He looked suddenly old, defeated. Isabella was not my wife, Genevieve. She was my twin sister. Evie's mouth fell open. Your sister. Frederick didn't tell you that part, did he? Silas walked back to the desk and touched the letters. We were orphans. Our uncle raised us, gambled away our inheritance, and left us with nothing. I went to Africa to find money to support her. I left her in the care of a man I thought I could trust, a man who courted her, a man who promised to marry her. Evie felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. Frederick. Viscount Pembroke. Silas spat the name like a curse. He seduced her. He used her. And when she fell with child, he abandoned her. He told her a viscount could not marry a pauper with no dowry. He left her alone, pregnant and disgraced. Silas's voice broke. He took a shuddering breath. She fled to France to hide her shame. She wrote to me, but the letters, they didn't reach me in the mines until it was too late. She died of a fever after the baby was born still. She died alone, Genevieve, calling for me, and I was thousands of miles away, digging for the gold that she needed. Evie was crying now, silent tears tracking through the dust on her cheeks. Oh, Silas. I came back, Silas whispered. I challenged him. We fought in Paris. I put a sword through his shoulder, but I didn't kill him. Death was too easy. I wanted him to suffer. I wanted to take everything from him, his money, his reputation, his future. He looked at Evie, his eyes burning with intensity. When I saw him leave you at the altar, it was happening all over again. Another girl used and discarded because she wasn't rich enough. I couldn't save Isabella. But I could save you. He stepped closer to her. He didn't touch her, but the air between them crackled. I didn't marry you because you were a ghost, Genevieve. I married you because you were the first person I had seen in 5 years who had been broken by him and refused to cry. I married you because I hate him. But he looked down at her hands. I am finding it increasingly difficult to remember that I am supposed to be acting out of hate. Evie's heart stopped, then restarted with a frantic rhythm. She looked at this man, this terrifying, scarred, formidable man, and saw the wounded boy inside. The monster Frederick had painted was gone. In his place was a hero who had arrived too late. "Silas," she whispered. She reached out and took his hand. It was rough, calloused, and trembling. "I am so sorry." He looked at their joined hands. "You should be afraid of me. I am a man obsessed with revenge." "No," Evie said firmly. She squeezed his hand. "You are a man who loved his sister, and you are a man who saved me." She stepped closer, closing the distance between them. "Frederick tried to use Isabella's memory to destroy us," she said, a new fierce anger rising in her. "He tried to poison me against you. He is a desperate man," Silas said, his thumb brushing her knuckles. "And desperate men are dangerous." "Then let us be dangerous too," Evie said. She looked up into his grey eyes. "He destroyed your sister. He tried to destroy me. Let us finish him, Silas. Together." Silas stared at her. For the first time since she had known him, a genuine smile touched his lips. It transformed his face, softening the harsh lines, making him devastatingly handsome. "Together," he agreed. He lifted her hand and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. It was not the kiss of a business partner. It was a promise. The following night, Evie dressed for war in crimson velvet. At the Royal Opera House, they found Frederick Desperation clinging to him as he courted the wealthy Miss Gold in her private box. Silas didn't wait for pleasantries. In front of the entire box and the surrounding audience, he produced a telegram. "The Argentine investments have collapsed Pembroke," Silas announced, his voice carrying like a gavel strike. "You are destitute." When Frederick tried to spin a lie, Evie stepped forward. She warned Miss Gold that she was merely a purse intended to pay off Frederick's debts to Silas. Horrified, the heiress walked away, dropping Frederick's arm. Cornered and sweating, Frederick lashed out at Evie, but she delivered the final blow. "I know about Isabella." The colour drained from his face. Realising his dark past and financial ruin were exposed to all of London, Frederick fled into the night, exiled from society forever. The drive back to Rosedale House was quiet, but the air had shifted. In the hallway outside her room, Silas turned to Evie, his expression guarded. "The debt is paid," he said softly. "You are free, Genevieve. I will not keep you in this cage any longer." He moved to leave, believing a man like him had no right to her. But Evie didn't move. She reached out, placing a hand over his heart to stop him. "You are a fool, Silas Hawthorne," she whispered. "I don't want freedom. I want you." She told him she saw the man who crossed continents for his sister and saved a stranger from ruin. The walls around Silas's heart finally crumbled. With a low groan, he pulled her into his arms. Their kiss was not a business transaction, it was a promise. The Wolf of Rosedale had claimed her to save his pride, but that night he claimed her heart. The wedding had been a sham, but the marriage was finally real. And that, my friends, is how Lady Genevieve Stirling went from a jilted bride to the most powerful Duchess in London. She didn't just survive the scandal, she turned it into a weapon. Frederick Pembroke got exactly what he deserved, exile and ruin, while Silas and Genevieve found something neither of them expected, true love in the midst of revenge. What did you think of Silas's secret? Did you guess that Isabella was his sister and not his wife? That twist changed everything. If you enjoyed this story of betrayal, revenge and redemption, please give this video a thumbs up. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. I have a new historical drama coming next week involving a runaway princess and a stable boy, and you won't want to miss it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next chapter.